So, hello, I am Nikki Golden, a strategist at Association Laboratory, and we are here for one of our 25 lessons in leadership videos. And I have with me the lovely Mary Lynn Fayoumi, who is the president and CEO of HR Source. Welcome, Mary Lynn. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Nikki. It's great to be part of this series. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I always like to start with we all come from into association management from so many different places. Tell us a little bit about your journey into association management and where you are today.
Well, like many of my association friends, we kind of fell into or stumbled into the association arena. So I started my career as an HR professional. Human resources was the field I studied in undergrad. Then I got an MBA, went to work in HR in downtown Chicago. And we were a member, my organization was a member of Management Association of Illinois, which is what the legal name of HR Source is. And we utilized a whole host of services that the association had to offer. And over time, someone from the association said, Mary Lynn, I just feel like you just have a unique set of skills that would make you a great association professional. Would you ever consider coming to work at an association? And I was not that excited at first, but then I thought, they have hundreds of members. And so I wasn't 100% thrilled with my job at the time and thought, well, I'll go to work for an association and then I'll meet my next employer. Well, here I still am many, many years later. It just turned out to be a perfect match for my interests, my passion. I'm a little different than some in that the association I work for and have for so many years and lead also is primarily focused on delivering HR information, resources, products, and services. So I'm super lucky in that I still get to be an HR practitioner.
You really
and
melded
those
interests.
Yeah. So that's how I found myself, in an association and have never looked back. I feel just really grateful that the wonderful industry became my home, my professional home.
That's a great story. I don't know that I knew that. HR Source has been your home for so long, and the only association you've worked with. You really kind of define, I think, why association management is such a great career, being a passionate member and being kind of picked by the association to say, you're a passionate member who would actually be really great at this work. I mean, I think that's what keeps us all tethered to the association world is those passionate members and the feeling that you're really helping people. So I love your story because it's kind of brought all of that together into one place.
Well, and so many members of our team also came from members, either kind of organically or when we had a job posting or through word of mouth or just people express interest. So a lot of our amazing team members somehow were connected either through a partnership or a collaborative effort, or we're working at a member organization. So it's not an unusual path. I think it's a really helpful path. One of our newest team members was a super active member and kind of pursued us over time. And he's just really brought a lot of great creative ideas because he thinks like a member, because he was one really recently.
Yeah. And that member perspective is so important. I've worked for associations where it really was kind of the association first. And that really, your members feel that, that you're coming from a place of like the association knows better than you. And really it's more about the member needs and wants and how you're there to help them. And so that's great that there's obviously that kind of very, very symbiotic relationship with HR Source and the industry that you cover.
Yeah, a little different than, again, some other associations, as well as even my own peers that run associations similar to mine, because HR is my home field. Even as I moved up through our organization and eventually became the CEO, I never wanted to leave behind some of my member-facing activities, so that I made sure that I stayed in touch and aware of what was happening. And so, even today, you'll still find me writing articles, doing some consulting work, speaking, quite frequently on current HR trends and topics, but that requires me to, be actively listening to what our members want and need, and staying really close to the mission of our organization, and never losing sight of that by being in some ivory tower and believing we know better than the member does.
Yeah. And I think, this is kind of a good segue into the first area we want to cover, because I think what we're seeing a lot more of is associations really needing to be the eyes and ears of what's happening in the industry that they're covering, rather than, kind of sitting up on a hill and decreeing down to things the way that they wish things were. And so, at this crossroads where associations sit, if you were to look 20 years ahead into the future and kind of look back over your shoulder at today, what do you think would be one of the most startling changes that we would see in association leadership?
So I thought the word startling, that's a high bar, right? Because so many crazy things are happening that we could have never imagined. So I often am asked this question about looking at the 20 years that I've been in this role. And so I reflected upon that question and how I answer that, which is just, the speed of change and the amount of competition and the diversity of the competition and the kind of blurry lines between competitors and partners, and of course the impact of technology. I would take all of that and put an exponential number on it, because the rate of change is just unprecedented. We've heard that over and over again. But when I reflect upon just leadership, like what's the most startling difference in leadership, the leaders 20 years from now are going to be required to operate on a much different level than what has been expected of us. So where they're going to come from, where their skills are going to be acquired from, where their core strengths are going to be, is going to be much more diverse and unique than the skill sets that got many of us into our roles now, which are quite traditional, education, certification, years in a particular professional path, all of these rungs on the ladder leading up to the C-suite. Right. We've already seen that in the for-profit arena, 25-year-old CEOs and entrepreneurs. Again, the diversity of our leadership and where they get their core skills is going to be so much different, and there aren't all these linear paths anymore. There's so many important ways to acquire the expertise, as well as the aptitude and traits that are necessary to be a successful leader. I don't think you and I today can even begin to fathom, right? No. I mean, there's a side of me, a few years from retirement that's thinking, I'm so glad I don't have to think about the pace at which, needing to operate at that level. But the beauty of it is also that leadership is going to come from within our organizations. So I think there's less pressure on just that one, top.
Absolutely.
I mean, leaders are going to be throughout our organizations. And so that also, gives me a lot of hope and excitement for the future, because we're not relying upon just that person in the top spot. We have a lot of amazing talent throughout our organizations that we can rely upon. And I think that'll be the norm, not the
Yeah.
exception in 20
Yeah.
years.
That is such a great point, because I do think we're seeing it a lot now, is that, teamwork is really what makes the dream work, right? I mean,
Yes.
you hear that phrase all the time, but I think that there is definitely less like looking to the CEO as like you're the sole authority, and really the CEO being the person who's able to identify within the staff who has the knowledge and the core strengths to get this one thing done that we could put together and give it to them and they just run with it. Versus, just kind of like needing to have your fingers in everything so that you feel really important. So I think that's a great change that we've seen. And I'm with you. I think that's a great change moving forward, because it does allow then for different skill sets of people to come in. It allows people it allows the association to really identify for that association's mission, what are the core strengths you need in a leader, and then for that leader to identify what are the core strengths I need in my leadership team, so that I can, we can work as a group to move this mission forward.
Right. And not to place all the expectation on there being one individual who has it all. Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
surrounding yourself with the talent that's going to drive your organization forward is vital.
Mhm.
So it's going to be more important than ever. It's, increasingly important in today's environment as we see so much consolidation of associations and, consolidation and collaboration of for-profits with not-for-profits. And I mean, like
Right.
every variation on a theme is already in place. And again, that's just going to keep happening and be the norm, not the exception.
Yeah. And, I think we saw that with COVID, when all of these things that kind of are coming out of COVID, it seems to me like were trends that we were kind of starting to see, but, kind of burying our heads in the sand a little bit, because we weren't prepared, or we didn't know how to maybe make some changes to respond to some of them. And then, COVID kind of forced us to. Which is, again, you kind of are segueing greatly into our next area, because part of associations looking forward sector research has really identified that elimination of boundaries. So you were talking about consolidation, partnerships, that boundary of where you get information from, competency by technology. It's really been disrupted, and it's really increasing that competition from for-profit organizations. So all of these things are disrupting this traditional association model. What are one of the things that you think is maybe an existential threat to association leadership? And how can we look at it as more of an opportunity than a threat?
So governance is not something that I've had a lot of challenges with, because we have a governance structure, we have a board of directors, we have bylaws, but we don't have an extensive volunteer core or a board of governors, a super rigid and complex governance structure. So I think for many organizations, their governance structure alone is a behemoth and a force to be reckoned with, and a big impediment to their progress. If I look at a very staff-driven organization like I have, I think one of the impediments to growth and development is a mindset of this is the way it's done, this is the way it has to be done, this is the way it's always been done. We tried that already. Having a culture of continuous learning, experimentation, risk-taking, being willing to make mistakes and admit them and learn from them, that is the opportunity. To me, being willing to look at programs and services, keep recreating programming and content and delivery methodologies that meet the needs of your current membership, your evolving membership, and tomorrow's membership, I am so proud of the fact that my HR source turned 125 last year, because
Wow.
to me, it's a compliment and to our ability to continue to learn and grow, right? Because what members needed in 1898 or 1924
Right.
or 1975, our mission has remained consistent, but figuring out what belongs in that bundle of member benefits is extremely important. And it's work that goes on every single day, right? It's the work of our organization to stay in tune, in touch. And there's so many more methods now to gather data, to look at the analytics, to figure out, to read the tea leaves, which they might have been doing in the past, and it's incumbent upon us to keep learning, keep growing, and shake things up. I mean, that rigidity, either brought on by a governance structure, a board of directors, rigid bylaws, or worse yet, rigidity in your way of thinking or in your leadership style, you might as well just ring the death knell. I mean, a lot of organizations are suffering in many ways because of that rigidity wherever it exists. And for many organizations, it exists in many places, and no one's willing to take the risk of putting their neck on the line and saying, we're not going to survive this in the years to come if we don't let go of some of this old practices, policies, systems, bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll die or we'll
Yeah. And
suffer
I
a
think,
long, ugly death.
I think a lot of that is also on us as association professionals, right? We talk about this in Association Laboratories Power of the Prepared Board workshop, but part of that rigidity, I think, is partially bylaws driven, but it's also on our end, I think, to educate our incoming board members that of what their real job is, which is to keep the organization moving in a positive direction. And that it's not you're coming in as president and you have 1 year to like make your mark. Because I think that part of that feeling from a board, especially like an executive committee of, I only have 1 year to be president, and we don't remove the risk from them for trying something, and the learning that comes from that trial, whether it was successful or not. And I think that's both on the staff side as well as on us to help educate our board members coming in, because it is that rigidity and that kind of thought process of like, I have a year. And it's really like, no, the thing that you start might not see success until year 3, and you should still be really proud of it. And you could still talk about it, but like things don't just happen overnight. And I think
Right.
that's part of the mindset that we get so stuck in is, how do we kind of like scramble and make these things happen to make somebody feel good about it, rather than like looking at the long term, and how do we prepare both staff and board to just kind of moving in the right direction. Might be fast sometimes, but it also might be slow, and that's okay. Everybody should still feel proud of the work that they're doing, and part of that, success when it happens.
Right. And it's so important to nurture that culture of continuous learning, not just at the staff level or the volunteer level, but really at the board level. And your example is really well taken, that unfortunately, there are a lot of individuals who aspire to these leadership roles for the glory and the stage time and the, putting it on their resume. And they're not really doing it from a place of authentic desire to see the organization prosper over the long haul, not just to have, a special year where they wield a lot of power. again, that's a change that needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
The not supporting that type of governance structure or board leadership, which is extremely detrimental to an organization's health, both in the short and the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of that, as we kind of think about leadership traits, um, and we've talked a little bit about some of them that, make a good leader. What is one of the things that a leadership trait you think might become obsolete in the future? And what emerging trait should replace it?
So the one that I think needs to just find its way quickly to the delete, button, trash can, self-centered ambition. So that's kind of a combo, an ugly combo of ego, arrogance, and power. And, power for power's sake, my way or the highway kind of thinking. And unfortunately, I wish I could say in 2024, we don't see a lot of it anymore. But I mean, you and I both know we still interact with people on a regular basis who really are just still very egocentric, not really very collaborative, not really looking to develop others, but looking for all the fame and glory themselves. So I would like to see self-centered ambition.
Which is so crazy to see in the association world, right? Because we are working for mission-driven organizations, and that seems like such a strange mix that would be appealing to people with that kind of egocentric viewpoint, but somehow we still attract a bunch of people.
Right.
It's weird.
You're so right. You would think that individuals like that would primarily find themselves in for-profit, publicly traded perhaps, and or entrepreneurial organizations where they weren't reporting to a board or driving a mission. But again, unfortunately, somehow a fair number of them do find their way to this wonderful industry. And so say a little prayer that they self-centered ambition will find its way out of it's still going to exist. There's no question it can be eradicated, but maybe we can see less of it in the association industry in the years to come.
And so what should replace it?
Well, self-awareness, I think, is kind of the counter, because there is the ability, I'm an eternal optimist, there is an ability to reform and improve. So even someone who in the past may have suffered from, self-centered ambition can make improvements. But self-awareness, when you look at all of the leadership traits that are necessary to lead an organization effectively, means self-awareness means you're an eternal student. You are willing to learn and grow from your mistakes. You're an active listener. So self-awareness, I think, applies to all different types of leadership traits and behaviors, and we just need more of it. We need it on an ongoing basis, not just once a year, New Year's resolutions, taking an assessment, but even after you've had a communication that you didn't think went very well, to reflect upon it, to discuss it, to be open about it, to be authentic. Right? I am such a proponent of what I deem a really wonderful transition to much more authentic leadership, like owning who you are and not trying to follow some prescribed definition of what the perfect leader is, but leading and being your own authentic, genuine self and bringing that to the workplace instead of hanging that up somewhere else and showing up at work as someone you think a leader needs to be. So self-awareness has just a multitude of benefits, and we need to see more of it, because without it, organizations are going to struggle, because we need it from top to bottom of the organization. Every human being can benefit from increased self-awareness.
I will add to that, the, with that self-awareness, the ability to say no, or no, excuse me, to say, I don't know, is I, so my background is in journalism. That's where I started my career. And it's really astounding to me because basically my entire first half of the career was like, I don't know about this. Let me read up on it. Let me talk to an expert. Let me, before I can write my story. And it's just really mind blowing to me the amount of people that just really struggle with saying, I don't know, but let me find out. Like it's such a
Which is,
simple, you don't need to
yeah,
know
it's
everything, as we just talked about, right? You have a team of experts. You're not expected to know the universe of information, but the amount of people who can't just like say that in the moment and then come back to fill in those blanks is really just talking about self-awareness. Like to me, that is the power of a self-aware person is that ability to say, I don't know. Let's figure it
right.
out.
So the HR Source's number one member benefit is our HR hotline. So members call and email, thousands of times a year. I think last year we 6,000 or more interactions with our members. And when new team members start at HR Source, I think they're always most surprised to find out we don't want or expect them to answer any question off the top of their head that they don't feel 100% comfortable. There is absolutely nothing wrong with saying to the member, that's a great question. Wow, I've never heard that question before, or that's a really new issue, or that's on a piece of legislation that there's no regulations yet, but let me talk to our attorneys and see what they think. There is no pressure to answer unless it's a super specific question. Really, our job is to ask better questions of the member to make sure that we do the appropriate research to help them find the answer. And new team members are often surprised when I or others on our team who are training them say, it's also okay to say, we're not the right resource for this, but let me help you find someone that is, right?
Yeah.
That's not, no shame on us. Actually, we're doing our members a service when we admit our lack of knowledge or understanding, and members are patient. If you have to just communicate with them. You may need a little bit more time. This is why this is a particularly challenging issue for us to research. Give me a little bit more backstory and that'll help me. Have you ever experienced this before? What is your precedent been? So I love your analogy to journalism, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying, I need to learn more. I mean, that's what makes research so fascinating, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you earn so much more respect when you're just honest about not knowing something. And then, as you said, be communicative, tell them you're going to get back to them and then get back to them with the information. It's so much more impactful, I think, for the member experience when they know that you've put in some work to help them. It wasn't just like something easy that you could rattle off the top of your head, but that you really put in that work to be able to, in your case, answer that question to the best of your ability to help them move forward. And, in bringing in other experts or bringing in other materials or, sending them to the place that like we could sort of help you, but a better place would be, this organization. And I think that is so much more meaningful to somebody than, some kind of flippant or short or made up answer that doesn't really provide the help that they need.
Exactly.
So yeah. We've, I think, talked a little bit about this at the beginning when we were just talking about that leadership trait of needing to bring in. So I think I already know your answer, but I want to give you a chance to kind of build on it. When you see that balance shifting between the need for a strong individual leader to that collaborative, decentralized decision-making in the future of associations, where do you see that balance shifting? How do you see those kind of decentralized decision-making groups coming together? How do you see that playing out?
Well, as we touched on before, I think the transition was well underway pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic kind of shot it into overdrive as organizations went remote and had distributed teams, spending much less in-person time together. There is no one size fits all. I mean, it is abundantly clear that organizations who push decision-making down within their organization and remove the impediments or barriers to making decisions and taking good care of the members and frankly, just getting stuff done, are going to be most successful. I mean, I hate to admit this because it pains me, but associations in many instances have struggled because they're just too darn slow. And there are too many checks and balances, and they can't get out of their own way because of their systems. And that's why, unfortunately, our industry in the past has suffered from losing great individuals who really wanted to make a career in the association field, but could not deal with the structures and the checks and balances and the just painfully slow decision making. So
and that goes back to that governance structure impediment that
Yes.
we've talked about. I mean, oftentimes that's built into the process.
So I know there's been quite a bit of programming on this, but when I look back at the pandemic, our team, as many other teams, figured out what our members needed and how we could serve them even better than we had before. So while some organizations really worried about losing members due to the pandemic, our membership renewals were better than ever because we just doubled down on acting quickly. Basically, there were very few approvals for anything. We turned off the price tag for lots of things that used to cost money. We became, counselors, therapists, unfortunately, sometimes medical advisors, because there were a lot of HR challenges as we were dealing with all of the issues related to, bringing people together safely and figuring out how to staff organizations.
And I'm sure even how, for those companies that never had work from home policy, how to quickly shift and create them.
Yes. And, HR professionals were also thrust into being the chief communicators for their organizations. Like their CEOs or executive directors weren't quite sure what to say or how to say it. So all of a sudden, if an organization was large enough to have a communications team, they were often working like this with HR for the first time ever. And then when immediately thereafter, the challenges related to staffing and compensation hit. So yes, the movement towards a more collaborative, decentralized movement of leadership and decision-making to where the work is done has been proven to be successful and imperative to the long-term health and well-being of the organization, and also better for the people who work there, right? Having a culture that shows not just in word, but in action that you trust the people that work there who are closest to the matters at hand, closest to the members, to solve problems in real time instead of putting it up through the chain and waiting around for someone who's not familiar with what's happening down on the ground level. So I'm thrilled with the fact that there was a really fast-paced evolution of these changes, and the organizations that have embraced that as a long-term operating model are going to benefit from it, not just now, but in the years to come, because that also allows us to lean into the talent that we have at all places in our organizations.
And really, when you consider that rapid evolution of members' needs and expectations, you gave a great example with your organization and the needs of information that they needed to deal with COVID restrictions, COVID work from home, all of those things. I think that is becoming so much more prevalent, that your member needs are changing so much more frequently now. How do you envision the role of association leaders then in ensuring that relevance, value, sustainable growth of the association for the next decade?
There is so much more required of an association leader that is outward facing in terms of trend spotting, the ability to be nimble and quick and fluid. That is increasingly the role of the leader, not to perform this kind of structured, preordained, like the model of what this ideal CEO is constantly changing as this world constantly changes. So the need to inspire hope and optimism and to get people to move in ways that help fulfill the mission through whatever authentic leadership style works best for your organization is going to be vital and critical. But it's also going to be changing because the people we're leading have fundamentally changed and will continue to change, right? The need for leaders to be empathetic, be able to communicate good news, bad news regularly in a variety of methods, and to admit failure, which for CEOs has never been particularly comfortable or easy, but it's necessary. Because if a CEO and a leader can't learn from their mistakes and admit mistakes, how are other people in the organization going to feel comfortable to do the same? So many of these leaders are already in our organizations, which is exciting. And many of them are already actively being mentored and developed and forging their own paths and leading from within their organizations. I think the future of association leadership is bright, but it is going to require a lot of self-awareness and a lot of willingness and openness to change and be different in order to keep pace with what's happening around us and seize opportunities that will come and go quickly if we don't have our eyes wide open and a willingness to embrace different possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great response. I think, this has been such a great conversation with you, Mary Lynn, and these have been just so fun to do because everybody comes from such a different perspective, and there is still so much, we are in a rapidly changing world, with people rapidly changing how they make decisions that we all have to figure out how to navigate. But, everybody's so optimistic and excited about the future. So that is really exciting to see, that, even though we know that there's change and things are going to be different, and we don't know 100% what that's going to be, that we're all excited about it, that there's lots of possibilities that we see out there, and just how exciting to see the profession progress, as all professions should. So thank you so much.
Agreed.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Lynn. This has been wonderful to spend time with you. To all those who are out there, please, continue to look out for our 25 lessons in leadership. We're talking to some really great people, and continue to watch the Association Laboratory website, our LinkedIn page, where we have a lot of exciting things coming up in terms of education and, of course, our association sector research this year. So thank you, Mary Lynn. Thank you to everybody, and hope everybody continues their learning process.
Thanks, Nikki. It's been really fun to talk to you, and congrats to Association Laboratory.
Thanks.